Over the 11 hours following the collision that killed him instantly, Charles Peck's phone made 35 separate telephone calls to his immediate family members. At 4:22 on Friday, September 12, 2008, the catastrophic head-on collision of two massive locomotives in the Chatsworth neighborhood of Los Angeles, California, resulted in the immediate deaths of 25 people. The sheer force of the collision caused an incredible amount of physical trauma. Yet for the family of one victim, a 49-year-old man named Charles Peck, the nightmare of the Chatsworth disaster extended into the unknown. The signal from his device was tracked by emergency personnel, serving as a digital beacon that guided search and rescue teams through the mangled steel to the exact coordinates of his crushed remains. The Los Angeles County Coroner's examination would confirm the impossibility of the event. Peck had died almost immediately after the train's collision. The cell phone that made the 35 calls has never been found. Before Charles Peck became the subject of this paranormal story, he was on a personal renaissance. He was 49 years of age. Charles Chuck Peck resided in Salt Lake City, Utah. Peck had built a stable career working as a customer service agent for Delta Airlines at the Salt Lake City International Airport, knowing that he would try to make you happy no matter what. Despite a fulfilling career and having 3 grown children from a previous marriage, Peck was in the middle of an emotional transition. He had entered in a committed relationship with Andrea Katz, a woman who resided hundreds of miles away in Westlake Village, California. Peck and Katz were engaged to be married. However, they'd agreed to delay the wedding ceremony until they could resolve the problems with their long-distance relationship and reside in the same state. The second weekend of September 2008 was supposed to be the beginning of this transition. Peck had gotten a promising job interview at the airport in Los Angeles. Getting this job would allow him to transfer to California, relocate, and begin his marriage with Andrea. On the afternoon of Friday, September 12th, Peck flew from Salt Lake City into Los Angeles. He went through the transit system, boarded the Metrolink commuter train heading northwards towards Moore Park Station, where he planned to visit his parents and meet Andrea. Andrea Katz was planning to drive to Moore Park Station to pick up her fiancé and begin a weekend of celebration. Chuck took a seat in the first passenger car of the Metrolink train. He was surrounded by your typical Friday commuters, college students, teachers, mechanics, people returning home for the weekend. At this exact moment, a sequence of catastrophic failures was in motion. The Chatsworth disaster was caused by an ingrained culture of negligence and apathy. Metrolink Train 111 was operated by Veolia Transportation, a French contracting conglomerate. At the controls of the Metrolink locomotive that afternoon was 46-year-old Robert Martin Sanchez. Sanchez was a veteran train engineer, but he had a bit of a spotted history. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation exposed a terrifying lack of oversight within Veolia's management hierarchy. Federal investigators established that Veolia management had fostered a culture that ignored operational risks and accepted blatant rule breaking from its train engineer. Robert Sanchez had been cited in 2006 for explicitly violating safety protocols by having his personal cell phone powered on and in use while operating a multi-ton commuter train. This prior citation placed Veolia on notice regarding Sanchez's dangerous dependency on his cell phone while on duty. Yet his behavior wasn't correct. Exactly 1 month prior to the Chatsworth collision, Robert Heidenbrand, the conductor who was assigned to Sanchez's train, personally witnessed Sanchez using his cell phone in the control department. Heidenbrand reminded Sanchez that this was a violation of operating rules and incredibly unsafe, and reported this infraction to his Veolia supervisor. Veolia management made no formal disciplinary actions against Sanchez to stop him from using his cell phone while operating a train. And you thought texting while driving was bad. Veolia management had completely ignored their responsibilities. The colleague advised Hildenbrand to go around management entirely and contact a union official the following day. That following day would never arrive for 25 people. On the afternoon of September 12th, Sanchez reported for a split shift that included more than 10 hours of active work over a 15-hour period. The NTSB would later rule that fatigue was not a primary contributing factor to the crash. The amount of Sanchez's cell phone activity during his shift was staggering. Federal investigators extracted data from Sanchez's cell phone and discovered that he had sent and received a total of 43 text messages and completed 4 phone calls while operating the train that day. These text messages elevated the negligence to a level of endangerment. Sanchez was communicating with a group of teenage train enthusiasts. The extracted text message logs indicated that just 4 days prior to the crash, Sanchez had permitted these teenagers to ride inside the locomotive cab and sit at the primary controls. On the afternoon of the collision, Sanchez was finalizing plans to let one of these teenage boys physically drive the commuter train between 4 stations later that evening. The text messages featured Sanchez assuring the teenager, "I'm going to do all the radio talking. you're going to drive. This was how the engineer entrusted with the lives of 225 passengers acted. Completely detached from the physical reality of the rail network, focused entirely on his cell phone, and actively coordinating severe breaches of federal rail security and safety. At 4:22 Pacific time, the environmental conditions in the San Fernando Valley were optimal. The skies were clear, visibility was unobstructed, and forensic examinations confirmed that all mechanical equipment, braking systems, and trackside signal infrastructures were functioning correctly. Metrolink Trank 111 was heavily loaded with Friday afternoon commuters, including Charles Peck in the lead passenger car, and it pulled away from Chatsworth Station and accelerated northbound along the Ventura County line. Simultaneously, a massive Union Pacific freight train, which was operated by a standard crew of 3, was traveling southbound on the exact same single-track line. Because the rail infrastructure in this corridor bottlenecked into a single track, safety was dependent on an automated system of visual control signals designed to route opposing traffic onto adjacent side rails. As Train 111 approached Center Point Topanga, the automated signal system detected the oncoming southbound freight train and illuminated a solid red aspect. In the hierarchy of railroad operations, a red aspect is an absolute requirement. The engineer must start braking and bring the locomotive to a complete halt and hold that position until the opposing train clears the main line. The NTSB's post-accident signal examination definitively confirmed that the westbound signal at CP Topanga was functioning correctly and actively displaying a red aspect as Metrolink Train 111 approached and passed it. Robert Sanchez never hit the brakes. Exactly 22 seconds before the moment of impact, Sanchez sent his final text message. Sanchez was completely engrossed in his cell phone, looking down at his screen rather than out the forward-facing window of the locomotive cab. At 4:22 p.m., the Metrolink passenger train routed a blind curb and met the Union Pacific freight train head-on. The combined velocity of the two converging trains was 83 miles per hour. The physics of the collision were apocalyptic. The Metrolink locomotive was forced deeply into the first passenger car. The lead passenger car telescoped, its aluminum and steel walls crumpling and folding the intruding mass of the locomotive. The passengers seated in this forward section, including Chuck Peck, were subjected to unsurvivable forces. The violent deceleration and structural collapse killed 25 people upon impact, including the engineer Robert Sanchez. 135 additional passengers sustained various degrees of injury, with 46 individuals trapped in the wreckage with critical, life-threatening trauma. The collision had occurred in a remote area in the northern San Fernando Valley on a late Friday afternoon, which coincided with the peak gridlock of Los Angeles rush hour traffic. Ambulances faced difficulty getting through the traffic to reach the site. The dead and the permanently trapped remained entombed within the twisted architecture of the first car. Deep inside this crushed, bypass section of wreckage, obscured beneath layers of collapsed steel and aluminum, lay the body of Charles Peck. Andrea Katz had been driving to the Moore Park station with the expectation of embracing her future husband. She heard the breaking news of the catastrophic head-on collision broadcast over her car radio, and she began to panic. She changed her route and started calling Peck's extended family. Over the ensuing hours, Andrea gathered together with Charles' parents, his son Charles Jr., and his brother Richard, his stepsister, and his stepmother. They met staring at the relentless cycle of television news broadcasts, waiting desperately for the official casualty list or a phone call from the hospital. And then the impossible happened. Andrea's cell phone began to ring. The caller ID illuminated the dark room with the name Charles Peck. They assumed the absolute best case scenario, that Charles had survived the initial impact and was trapped beneath the rubble, and he was using his cell phone to call for help. She answered the phone immediately. She shouted his name into the receiver, anticipating the heavy breathing, background sirens, or even just pleas of a man buried alive. But instead, there was just silence. After several seconds of dead air, the call dropped. Andrea immediately dialed the number back, and the call went straight to Charles Peck's voicemail. The family attempted to rationalize what happened. They thought that Charles was severely injured, but conscious enough to press the redial button. Minutes later, the cell phone belonging to Charles Peck Jr. began. The caller ID once again displayed his father's number. Like Andrea, Charles answered frantically. When he was questioned by the journalist if his father managed to leave any voicemails or communicate at all, Charles Jr.'s response was no, just silence. Over the next 11 hours, spanning the entirety of Friday night and stretching deep into the early hours of Saturday morning, Charles Peck's cell phone made exactly 35 calls. The cell phone didn't dial random numbers. It didn't try to contact 911. It called the inner circle of the individuals gathered together praying for his survival. The calls cycled between his fiancée, his son, his brother, his sister, and his stepmother. Each time a phone in the room rang, the family experienced an adrenaline-fueled surge of hope. Each time they answered the line, they were subjected to the same silence. Each time they attempted to call him back, they were directed back to his voicemail. It was an 11-hour cycle of torture. The barrage of 35 phone calls was psychologically agonizing for the family. They were operating under the belief that Charles was alive and manually triggering his cell phone from the debris field. The family contacted the authorities to report the incoming calls, and this was relayed to the emergency command center operating the Chatsworth crash site. Rescue crews coordinated directly with the cell service provider to execute a real-time triangulation of the network ping. The repeated calls from Peck's phone provided enough data for the network to pinpoint a localized quadrant within the first passenger car. Search and rescue teams were able to use heavy hydraulic cutting equipment, chewing through the dense, crushed wreckage, and navigate directly towards the coordinates identified by the GPS and cellular data. At approximately 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, roughly an hour after the 35th and final phone call was received by the family, the rescue teams found Charles Peck. The discovery shattered the hope of survival that had been sustaining the family throughout the night. Charles Peck was dead. The true horror of the situation didn't reveal itself until the Los Angeles County Coroner conducted its autopsy. The autopsy yielded a definitive conclusion. Charles Peck had not survived the 83-mile-per-hour collision. The massive crush forces in his section of the passenger car had resulted in instantaneous, catastrophic trauma. He died the millisecond the locomotive telescoped into his seat. He had been dead for 12 hours before his body was recovered from the steel. There was no possibility that he had made those cell phone calls to his family 35 times over the 11 hours. When the recovery teams sifted through the immediate debris surrounding Peck's body to retrieve his personal effects and log evidence, they uncovered another anomaly of the Chatsworth disaster. Despite utilizing the active cellular signal from that exact location to find his body, the cell phone that placed the 35 calls was gone, and it was never recovered from the wreckage. In the aftermath of the Charles Peck anomaly, people have mobilized to provide rational explanations for the event. How does a vaporized, unrecoverable cell phone owned by a deceased person dial a specific family member's 35 times? In the late 2000s, mobile telecommunications that were operating on 2G and 3G used a complex system of digital packet transmission and signal handoffs. When someone would initiate a cell phone call, the physical device would transmit a request to the nearest cell tower, which would then route the data packet to the recipient's network. In normal situations, this takes milliseconds. However, if the network is sudden to extreme congestion, which is something that happens in mass casualty disasters where thousands of panicked people flooding the cell networks, data packets can become stalled, corrupted, or trapped in digital limbo. The theory is that in the terrifying seconds immediately prior to the crash, Charles recognized that a catastrophic impact was imminent and tried to call his family. He may have rapidly mashed the dial or redial buttons right as the trains collided. The sudden violent destruction of the phone at the exact millisecond of impact could have generated a massive software or a hardware malfunction. And instead of properly terminating the initial call request, the damaged network might have trapped the call data within a network routing loop. Another technical explanation involves the mechanics of voice over internet protocol ghost calls. Ghost calls occur when automated port scanners, network hackers, or severe internal misconfigurations trigger the SIP signaling protocol of a specific phone, causing it to ring repeatedly without any actual caller on the originating end. And this results in the phenomenon experienced by the Peck family: a ringing phone, an answered call, and a payload of absolute dead air or electronic static. However, these theories face some issues when applied to what happened in this case. First, the theory of a network routing loop releasing delayed packets fails to account for the sheer volume of the calls. 35 distinct calls spaced out evenly over an 11-hour period is beyond a standard network glitch. And the targeting of the calls was too precise. A random glitch would not selectively target the specific private phone numbers of Peck's fiancée, son, brother, and sister. For the network to repeatedly dial those specific numbers, the cell phone had to be making those calls. Third, the timing of the ending was a problem. The phone calls did not slowly taper off as the Friday night network congestion cleared. The 35 calls happened throughout the night and then stopped abruptly just 1 hour before rescue workers physically unearthed his body. Finally, the triangulation aspect is the biggest mystery of all. If the calls were merely ghosts in the grid, they would not have provided localized real-time geographic pings originating from the exact coordinates of the crushed passenger car. The rescue teams tracked a physical active signal radiating from the wreckage, and this proves that the hardware was present, powered on, and communicating with the local cell tower until the moment the call ceased. Yet, the cell phone was never found. Because the science doesn't provide a good answer, the story shifts into the paranormal. The Charles Peck case has been heavily documented, analyzed, and debated by paranormal researchers. The idea of the dead using electronic technology to communicate with the living has been going on since the late 50s. Researchers have conducted extensive experiments recording disembodied voices on magnetic tape. There is a parapsychological theory that consciousness can manipulate localized electronics. In 1979, paranormal researchers D. Scott Rogo and Raymond Bayless published Phone Calls from the Dead, an exhaustive catalog establishing a historical documented precedent for the exact phenomenon experienced by the Peck family. Within the confines of parapsychology, the Charles Peck anomaly is an extreme example of a crisis apparition. Traditional crisis apparitions involve an individual vividly seeing, hearing, or sensing a loved one at the exact moment that loved one experiences a violent, unexpected death. The underlying theory is that the massive traumatic energy generated from the moment of sudden death can project outward, bypassing physical constraints to seek comfort, issue a warning, or deliver a final message to those the deceased loved. In the digital age, parapsychologists argue that this theory has evolved to match the environment. People who support this theory assess that entities no longer need to manifest visually or audibly in a physical room. Instead, they manipulate the dense electromagnetic frequencies that saturate our modern world. Charles Peck's consciousness utilized the localized electromagnetic field of his own damaged cell phone to reach out to the specific minds he was most closely connected to. And the abrupt stopping of the phone calls also bolsters this interpretation. They didn't fade away slowly, nor did they continue after his discovery. They ceased as the rescue team triangulated his position and drew physically close to his remains. In the lore of the paranormal, this is viewed as mission accomplished. The anomalous energy, fueled by a desperate need to be found, persisted just long enough to guide the researchers to his body, ensuring he would not be left behind in the ruins of the Chatsworth disaster, before finally dissipating. The story of Charles Peck has transcended the localized tragedy of the Metrolink crash, and it's embedded itself deeply in the modern paranormal culture. It's been dissected in true crime podcasts, high strangeness forums, and deep dive documentaries. And it resonates with us because it's spooky, but also because it strikes at the core of a universal modern anxiety that we all have. We all operate with supercomputers in our pockets, and we're reliant on this invisible web of cellular signals to connect us to the people that we love the most. We trust technology completely, yet we don't understand the complex mechanisms of how it actually works. When a man's heart stops beating amidst a catastrophic matrix of torn steel, dictate death. But when the phone in his pocket continues to bridge the gap between the living and the dead for 11 hours, the boundaries of known reality fracture. Whether the 35 calls were the result of an unprecedented, perfectly timed sequence of digital routing errors cascading through a digital network, or the desperate final projection of a soul refusing to vanish silently into the dark, the outcome remains the same. Through mechanisms that defy explanation, Charles Peck guided his family to his side one last time, leaving behind a technological mystery written in static, echoing permanently into the void. Please subscribe to this channel, The Spooky Lawyer. Please like and share this video. If you'd like to support the channel, you can become a member of the channel. I appreciate you considering that. You can also support me by liking, sharing, commenting on, and hitting the hype button on my videos. And I do appreciate you watching my videos. And please stay spooky.